The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and religion. We'll explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they'd been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Brown, Jr., and with us today is Jeff Burns, Jr., the author of The Brotherhood of Drew Hall. Welcome to African American Legends.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And it's
now, you're part of this brotherhood from
yes,
Drew Hall. Now, tell us what Drew Hall was and why the Brotherhood is so important.
Well, Drew Hall is the main men's dormitory at Howard University. It's probably the largest dormitory of African American men in the collegiate world. But what's so historic about this is that Drew Hall is named after Dr. Charles R. Drew, who, of course, is known for his scientific work in terms of blood plasma, which saved millions and millions of lives during World War II. As a matter of fact, the foreword for this book was written by his daughter, Dr. Charlene Drew Jarvis.
And his sister went to high school with me at Dunbar High School in Washington, D.C.
You know everybody. Yes, she did. She did. And, I was really happy when she agreed to write the foreword for this book because it is historic. And she was very proud. Mm-hmm. She said that her father demanded excellence, and from what she could see, the men in this book achieved and lived by excellence.
So what is the Brotherhood?
Well, the Brotherhood, basically, guys, I met at 17 years old. I was checking into Drew Hall for the first time, and we were all bumping into one another in the hallway.
What year was this?
1968.
Right after Dr. King had been assassinated.
Yes, as a matter of fact, my mother took me down to Howard to see the school, and when I went down, you still smelt the embers burning right after the riots. And she was saying, "You sure you want to go here?" I said, "I'm absolutely sure that I want to go."
Why did you want to go there?
Well, I wanted to go to Howard because it is the best of the best. It's world known, not just in the United States. Growing up, I would read copies of Ebony and Jet and black newspapers. And each time I read one of those periodicals and they spoke about people who were making it in civil rights, in politics, in medicine, I noticed that the overwhelming majority of them went to Howard University.
So Howard or Morehouse?
No, they went to Howard University. Well, no, they also did go to Morehouse. And Lerone Bennett, who's a very good friend of mine, Lerone and I would kid about this, but they did go to both Howard or Morehouse as well.
And Lincoln, too.
And yes.
Okay.
In terms of the total number, Howard.
Yeah, definitely.
Howard wins, yes.
Howard was the largest of the black colleges at that time.
It's the largest dental school, medical school, and law school. I mean, out of that law school, Thurgood Marshall came out, and of course, we know he made it to the Supreme Court. And as a matter of fact, one of the guys I met my first couple of hours at Howard, he lived across the hall from me. He was one of the dorm counselors, and he sits right now on the federal courts, in line, hopefully, to become one of the next Supreme Court justices.
What is his name?
Oh, well, his name is Wiley Daniel, and he was the first person. He just graduated from Howard, undergraduate, and he was in Howard Law School, and today he's a federal judge. So,
this book, The Brotherhood of Drew Hall, you were talking about the interaction, or you're talking about the accomplishments? You're talking about the obstacles?
We kept bumping into each other those first couple of days, and all of a sudden we realized we were always hanging out. And we hadn't pledged any fraternities. Of course, Omega Psi Phi was founded on the campus of Howard. There you have the APHIQs and Kappas and Deltas and AKAs as well. And they all do a good job. But we just decided, hey, we're a brotherhood. And I don't have any brothers. I don't have any biological brothers. Most of them in that book don't. But we just said, hey, you're my brother. You're my brother. And we've been lifelong friends and have stood side by side with each other through trying times in life, rites of passage in life, funerals, deaths, births, you name it. We've all been there for one another from 1968 to today. And it's just an incredible. Now, there are a couple of guys who do belong to, we have two of them who belong to Omega Psi Phi. As a matter of fact, one gentleman, his name's Tony Holder. And Tony, and you'll appreciate this, being an airman, Tony is one of the chief pilots for Federal Express. And he came through Howard's Army, Air Force ROTC program. And he's from Queens, as a matter of fact. And he's flying today. He's one of the top pilots in the world. So,
you know, one of the Tuskegee Airmen, Charles Dryden, was one of the first professors of air science and tactics at Howard University.
Wow.
After the war.
Wow.
Now, in this book, you talk about your experiences at the college.
Yes, sir.
Of those experiences, which ones do you think were most impressive?
Well, at Howard, you were living Black history every day. From the moment I stepped on campus, I was living Black history. Those guys that I saw every day who became members of the Brotherhood, they are also historical figures in their own right. And we kind of motivated each other. When you look for role models, and I know that you're one of the founders of 100 Black Men, you know, and certainly they are role models. We saw each other as role models. We saw upperclassmen as role models. We saw people graduating, but coming back to Howard every single year while they were in law school, medical school. Dr. Hewitt Brown led the first takeover of Howard University. He was in medical school. He's from Bermuda. They took over Howard. And later on, there was a takeover in New York City of Columbia. But it happened at Howard first, Columbia second. And even though he was in medical school, you know, one of the things that Howard teaches you is to be sensitive to the African-American community and the struggle. I mean, we are children of the Civil Rights Movement. And just as we got there, it went from the Civil Rights Movement to the Black movement. The first week I was at Howard, there was a press conference on campus. And from the 1968 Olympics, the two track stars, Tommy Smith and John Carlos, who raised that clenched fist, which became one of the most international symbols of the Black movement, that photo was shown all over the world. It became posters. We saw copies of that poster on the walls of everybody in Drew Hall and Cook Hall and Carver Hall, you know, as well. And so I'm standing on the steps of Frederick Douglass Hall, and I see you have Frederick Douglass's picture in the studio. So I was standing there, and next thing I know, here comes Tommy Smith, the gold medal winner, John Carlos, the bronze medal winner in, you know, the 200-meter run, and H. Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, who's a graduate of Howard, and they're all standing there to hold a press conference on Howard's campus, standing on the steps of Frederick Douglass Hall, and I'm standing right there. So from that point on, it was just a continuous. I mean, every week there was someone dynamic coming back to campus or making their hijira, so to speak, to Howard's campus to speak. In all the professional schools, they had graduates come back to the law school, the School of Engineering, et cetera. And in terms of cultural entertainment, everybody was, as a matter of fact, right at Howard, we had a classic R&B group called the Unifics. And while they were going to Howard, they already had 3 hits. They were on the top of the charts. We had Minister Richard Smallwood, who came out with a gospel album, Howard Gospel album. That was the name of it. And he's a very prominent Dove winner, Stellar Award winner today. And at that same time, we had jazz artist Dr. Donald Byrd teaching jazz at Howard. And he formed the Jazz Ensemble. And a couple of those guys in Drew Hall were members of Donald Byrd and the Blackbirds. So when they were playing Rock Creek Park, we knew who was on flute. We knew who was on drums because all these guys were in our dormitory. We're walking across campus, and at the same time, we were listening to the gospel album. We were listening to Donald Byrd, and then Howard got the first Black-owned radio station in Washington, D.C. from the Post, the Washington Post, WHUR 96.3 FM. And so now we've got a.
Were you ever on it?
Yes, I was. And hopefully I'll be back on there with this.
What did you do?
Well, I was taking courses in the school. I did a double major in business and also in the School of Communications. And in the School of Communications, I was taking film. I took a course also with Tony Brown of Tony Brown's Journal. My directing instructor was actually Sanaa Lathan, the actress's father, Stan Lathan, who was a prominent director. And WHUR, you know, was over there, you know, because a lot of the guys, again, in Drew Hall, they were there when you flipped the switch. There's one gentleman in the book, Phil Evans, who was very active there. And he was at Howard, and he had to leave and come back for family matters. But he came back, and he was the on-air personality for then what became WHUT, which is the television station that Howard has. So, there's always been that connection. I felt connected to Howard before I went there. I'm still connected. I've been very active with the alumni associations, with the School of Communications, hosting film festivals, as a matter of fact, even in Harlem. 2 years ago, we raised money for the students at Howard from Trinidad and Tobago because of the hurricane. Mm-hmm. And so we raised money to donate so they could, continue their studies at Howard. So I feel like I've never really left. I'm down there probably once a week, every other week, working.
But as I recall, in the late 60s, early 70s, there were a lot of student protests.
Absolutely.
And many of them were directed at the administration.
Yes, they were.
Now, what were your protests about toward the administration at that time?
Well, one of the protests was dealing with the requirement that you had to take Army or Air Force ROTC. That was a requirement at one time. They lifted that requirement. But a lot of students from the South who were more familiar, because most of the Army bases and Air Force bases are located in the South. So there were more of them taking ROTC anyway, and they continued, than students from the North. I went to school in the North. There's nobody that I knew from the North at my high school. They didn't know anything about ROTC. But
Did you know anything about Tuskegee Airmen when you were a kid?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I knew everything about the Tuskegee Airmen because my father was in World War II. He was one of the Black Panthers as a part of the 761st Tank Battalion. So in becoming familiar with what his role was, and in terms of his unit having the presidential citation, I also became familiar with the Tuskegee Airmen, and then through my work, certainly.
So why were you against the Air Force ROTC?
Well, I wasn't that familiar with it. I was really I was taking as many, a lot of my electives, I was taking in School of Communications. So I was working on a double major. And, I figured,
So what happened as a result of the protest?
What happened is they did say ROTC became an elective at Howard. And they wanted a Black Studies program at Howard as well, sanctioned with a doctoral program. They were good. The protests were justified. I think in the long run, it was positive for the university as well. And I think anyone who was at the university at that time would probably agree.
Of course, there were protests in hundreds of universities.
Right.
I was a professor at New York University, and out of that protest, they created the Institute of African American Affairs, which I headed. So I'm aware of the role of students in this. I just wanted to bring you back a little bit to where you were when you were a rebel.
Well, yeah, and Howard was an incubator, and I would dare say that many of those people in the book, the Brotherhood of Drew Hall, they were there. They were physically there during those protests and in the administration building, and you saw them out protesting and picketing. And again, one of the things that Howard instills in you, when you take a look at the history of those who have graduated, they've all went out to serve the community. And everyone in this book serves the community with Big Brothers through 100 Black Men, through mentoring programs across the country. So, Howard is still in their blood. And the same thing, yes, would hold true with Morehouse College. So.
Now, in terms of the structure of the book, do you cover individuals chapter by chapter, or are you talking about it chronologically as you went from one area to the other?
Well, and thanks, that is a good question. I'm always talking about Howard in some way, shape, or form. And I thought it would be good, based on the time period, because this is one of the most significant historical time periods in the country. In that 1968, Fannie Lou Hamer was speaking at the Democratic Convention. So many things were, Dr. King had just been assassinated. There were so many things going on. But, so I thought about it. I thought about the history in music. Cosby was on TV at that time period he was coming on. You had, at the same time, in that same year, you had Sidney Poitier in To Serve with Love. So there was so much going on. So I asked each contributor to give me their reflections as a student, what brought them to Howard, what excited them about Howard, what did they get out of Howard, how are they contributing back to Howard today. And I'm really proud of each of them because there's a young man in there who happens to be today. He's the dean of the UCLA Medical School, and he came to Howard from Texas. His father was a minister, Dr. Arnold Washington, and he had his sights set on being a doctor. Another guy had his sights set on being a pilot, like yourself. All of them, you know, they set their goals high, and I was able to see them, not only see them achieve their goals, but supersede their goals. So I'm extremely proud of them, each and every one. And they are mentors, they're role models. And even though the book, I'm the author of the book, I don't have to be the sole person talking about the book. Each and every single person in that book can go out and discuss the book and hold forums and discussions and try to motivate and inspire other young black men to go to college. Ideal if they go to Howard, great. If they go to Morehouse or an HBCU, great. But to do something with your life. We're in a crisis mode right now, and I think from a timing perspective, this book is really perfect for today's young black men.
Now, what did Jeff Burns do coming out of Drew Hall?
Well, I wanted to go into the world of communications and make a difference in terms of the imagery that you see in terms of African Americans. And so what I did, one of my goals was to work for Ebony. And I sent 5 letters, and I got 5 rejections. And but that didn't deter me. I did send a letter, and I got a job working there. And I started at the bottom in sales, and ultimately rose to become associate publisher and senior vice president, working directly under John H. Johnson, who was the founder of the company.
And you developed many programs for Ebony, bringing people together.
Yes, I did. And your organization, 100 Black Men, people were saying, well, Jeff, you know, you're doing programs for African-American women in marketing and communications to inspire young girls. You're doing a mother and daughter program. Why not, what about our black men? So I thought about it. I said, you know, you're right. And there are very few programs for black men. And it's easier to get dollars from corporations for women's programs than men's programs. But at least this time around, I had an angel in the midst. And that angel worked at Colgate. And she said, you know what? They're right. And Colgate will sponsor a father-son program. You come up with the concept. I don't know what the budget's going to be, but I guarantee we will sponsor it. Dr. Brown, it was one of the most successful programs ever. Dr. Lerone Bennett Jr., who's editor emeritus for Ebony, came, and he told me, he said when he went back to Chicago, he stopped at Mr. Johnson's home and told him that the Ebony Father-Son program was the most successful of all the programs he had seen. I have young men today who were teens then and who are grown men now and say they were touched by that program. It was empowerment. It started at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 7:30, I had a line at 2,500 fathers and sons waiting to get into the Hilton. We had college presidents there to talk about the value of a college education. We had people there who could talk about career opportunities. We had doctors. They had some 2 brothers who were young doctors to talk about healthcare needs in the black community for young men. And it was just a beautiful program. I had one award, and we talked about Morehouse a little earlier. I had an award to be presented to the president of Morehouse, and it was presented by the minister of Abyssinia, Dr. Calvin Butts. And we invited for the luncheon all of the alumni members of Morehouse in the area to come out. So it was a really beautiful event, and we did that for a few years, and it was great. And people keep saying, Jeff, why don't you do something like that again? Members of the 100 Black Men said, Jeff, why don't you do something like that again? So then I came up with the idea of the book. I thought about the relationship that these guys and I have had all of these years and how close we are. I thought about my commitment to Howard in terms of giving back and promoting to the university. And, I thought about the need to present positive images of black men who were not necessarily entertainers or sports figures, but ministers, doctors. And these are men at the top of their game too, by the way. And so I said, I'm going to collapse all this into one and come out with a book and call it The Brotherhood of Drew Hall. And some of the guys, by the way, did marry their college sweethearts. A lot of them in the book, their children have gone to Howard University, as well. So it's a great story. It's a great read, and there is no book like this. I'm proud of Howard. I'm proud of this book. If not for Howard, the book would not have existed.
Well, as more blacks are going to predominantly white colleges, there's some challenge to the historically black colleges, and some people are asking, is there really a need for historically black colleges to build so many programs? What is your answer to that?
Well, I would say absolutely yes, there is, because when you attend a historically black college, the one thing I noticed from day one, you could not say that the professor was discriminating against you because the professor looked just like you.
Not necessarily.
Well,
At
most
many
days-
of the historically black colleges now
But when I
have
was
the
there, I'm
faculty.
saying most of them,
But
a lot of them.
what about today? Is there a need for HBCUs?
Oh, absolutely.
Why?
Well, because the people who go to those HBCU commitments, they go based on a legacy of success. If you take a look at the ministry and look at some of the people who are some of the most prominent ministers today, they came out of Howard. If you take a look at the medical school and you see some of the most prominent names, Dr. Lafitte LaSalle, you know, Dr. Drew. I mean, you can't find a name in the medical world bigger than Dr. Charles Drew. And if you take a look, and he didn't just service the black community. In World War II, the work he did with blood plasma saved the lives of many Europeans. And if you take a look at the sciences, one of the gentlemen in the book is a friend of mine. He developed a unique program he was on loan from Howard to the Red Cross. He developed a program for the Red Cross that would allow them to identify donors and match blood types anywhere in the world. So, you know, they are really, you know.
No, I do agree that there is a need. But the question is, how do you justify having a predominantly black colleges when there's so many opportunities in what used to be predominantly white colleges?
Well, I would say this, and if you take a look also at Howard or Morehouse or Lincoln, one of the things that goes beyond the fact that it's predominantly African American.
By the way, we should mention Spelman and some of the black women's colleges.
And Spelman,
okay.
and Spelman is yeah, absolutely. You know, as a matter of fact, my cousin is at Spelman right now. So, one of the other things about those schools, they attracted an international audience. If you take a look at the School of Medicine or Engineering and the math departments, you'll see a tremendous number of people from the Caribbean. You'll see a tremendous number of people from Asia who are attending school at Howard. Howard has, and people aren't really aware of it, they have a very huge international student body population. And so it is a melting pot. You have an opportunity to meet and greet students from other cultures in other lands and build up a network. One of the things that I've always known was networking is, I like to call it networking to success. At Howard, the fabric of your network is established. But at Howard, you build a global network. I know people in the Caribbean. I've been in the Caribbean and people come up, hey, Mr. Burns, how you doing, so-and-so? And some people say, oh, you know, they'll come up, I know you went to Howard with my father, with my brother, et cetera, et cetera. And the same, one of the best business trips I ever took, I went to Japan with Reverend Jesse Jackson to broker a deal with the Japanese for Japanese automotive business and electronic business. While I was there was a young lady who was a student in school communications with me, who was then working with NBC News, my classmate from Howard. And she's over there in Japan covering my trip with Reverend Jackson. So it is an incredible network. And networking works. And the important thing is you have to work that net in order to make it work. That's the way it is. That's the way it is in business. People, you go with who you know. Now, that doesn't mean you just go with who you know because you know them. They have to be qualified, capable, and able. And if they're qualified, capable, and able, then you hire them. Then you give them a chance to prove themselves. But you know, you have to be out there. You got to really.
All right. As we come to the close of the program, how does one get this book?
Well, the book is coming out. You know, this will probably be up around the holidays. We will have the book available in bookstores on college campuses, Howard, obviously. But you know, I'm going to have the book. Try to get the book in the Schaumburg, all the black bookstores in black areas. We will also post it online as well. But one of the things that I really want to do with this book, Dr. Brown, I would like for organizations and groups to buy the books, invite young black men to come to a forum or conference, and whether it's me or other members of the Brotherhood of Drew Hall who are there, they can speak to them directly about what they should do with their lives. And so I would like to sell the book to these organizations so they can actually give signed copies to the young men they bring out to hear from the Brotherhood of Drew Hall. And the sisters, because there are a couple of sisters who are on there as well. So that's what I would like to do.
By the way, as we come to the close of the program, what was the nickname for the Howard University sports teams?
The Bisons.
The Bisons.
The Bisons. The Bisons. You're a true Washingtonian, I see that.
Well, I grew up largely on the Howard University campus. My father had an office there, so I know much about Howard University, what it meant, and going to chapel on Sunday morning with President Mordecai Johnson, who would talk about Howard University, the capstone of Negro education.
Right, right.
So I want to compliment you on bringing this life together, this Brotherhood of Drew Hall at Howard University. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Jeff Burns Jr., the author of The Brotherhood of Drew Hall. Thanks for being with us today, Jeff.
Thank you, Dr. Brown.
Okay, very good.